Welcome back to another episode of The Art of Bird Photography. In this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about this photo here of a blackish rail. The blackish rail is a very cool bird. It is not so easy to see, but in the morning they can sometimes be found feeding in these ponds that I know of. And there's a similar rail actually that's nearby. It's called the slaty-breasted wood rail. That's a little bit easier to see. It looks a lot like this rail, but has a longer neck. That's one of the main ways you can tell the difference between the two. And I'm going to talk about a few ways that I think this photo could be improved. Now, as in the last episode, I mentioned that I won't be talking much about the technical side of bird photography. I won't be talking about the technical aspects of editing. So I'm not going to show you how I do all the edits. I think that would take too long and it will be kind of boring. I much prefer to talk about the art of bird photography, such as composition and the reasoning behind the adjustments, because I think you can make the adjustments yourself. And if you need some help with editing, of course, you can look at some of my other videos or watch videos on the editor of your choice. That's another thing I want to mention. I'm using the open source editor Darktable, but you can use any editor you want, and the principles I talk about are editor independent. They will work for any editor. So this is not a tutorial on Darktable, even though I'm using Darktable because it's my favorite editor. So let's take a look at this blackish rail. Actually, I want to say that this photo is one of those photos that is starting to convince me that eye-level shots are not always the best. You know, I think eye-level shots are very stunning and they're very beautiful, but sometimes it's nice to show a little bit of the water, a little bit more of the ground in a bird shot. Not always. I still think shooting at eye level is a very good idea, but I do think that sometimes it's nice to include some of the water because it gives a little bit more of the sense of the microcosm or the environment of the bird. And I like this shot more because, well, first of all, I couldn't get at eye level with this shot. And second, I kind of liked the fact that this rail was a little bit shy, so I couldn't get too close to this rail. There wasn't enough room to get an eye level shot. It was also too dark to really accomplish an eye level shot. I think an eye level shot in this case would have actually failed because, well, you know, it was very dark. It was early in the morning, and I was shooting with the Nikon 500mm f5.6 lens. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, the ISO is ISO 5000. So we do got quite a lot of noise in this photo. And I kind of like the overall feeling, the mystique. And this is one of those photos where, yes, if you zoom in here and you probably did something, you could brighten the face a little bit, but I actually chose to keep the face dark in this photo. I think I like the photo more of its overall essence, the shape of the bird. You can see the nice reflection in the water, and the mysteriousness of the blackish rail I think it's very well shown off by this photo. So now I want to talk about two things that I think could be improved here. This is one thing I like to do. Stare at the photo, just take the overall essence. Don't look at any single part of it, just try and take its overall essence in. And when I do that, no matter what I do, and no matter how long I do it, whether it's the first time I saw this photo or after some time of editing, for some reason, the spot, this dark spot in the bottom left-hand corner, this dark spot here always catches my eye. I'm looking straight at the bird right now, and for some reason that spot is catching my eye. So what I did do is, I did clone that spot a little bit out. I used these retouch modules. And you can see now that the spot is cloned out, and I think that's a lot better. In terms of cloning, I don't like to clone too much. I won't clone out entire branches. I will clone out tiny little spots that I didn't notice in the field. So my philosophy is, if it's a tiny thing that I didn't notice in the field and that a viewer wouldn't notice if they were there, then I might clone it out. I won't always clone it out, but in this case, little spots at the edge of the frame, I don't mind cloning out a little bit. And another thing I did here was I just added an extra tone curve to that bottom corner to get rid of some of that graininess. So you can see when I activate that tone curve, yeah, off, on, off, on. So you see that I applied a little bit of a gradient mask, and that kind of gets rid of a little bit of that dirty look in the bottom corner. And now when I just look at the photo again, that spot no longer bothers me. Now the question is, would that spot bother somebody else if they were looking at this photo? I'm not sure, but because I think of a photo as something to transmit my own experience in the field to another viewer, I think there is certainly a possibility that that spot would be bothersome to some people, so I edited it out. So another thing that I kind of chose to do in this photo is, I notice I like the colors. There's a very muted sense of color. I don't want to boost the saturation here, but I do notice that there's a very nice form of the bird, and the part that grabs my attention the most is actually this sort of brown back of the bird. So I want to enhance that just a little bit. So I'm going to brighten the browns and also give the greens a little bit more saturation because the greens look a little too gray to me. Usually in a photo like this, I will say that if you have a different color on the bird compared to the background, it often pays to give a little bit of pop to some of the colors, not all of the colors, but some of the colors on the bird. I did that in this color equalizer. You can use any color tool you like. You can see that's on, off, on, off. And you see when I turn it on, it gives just a little bit more attention to that nice back of the bird. And in Rails, that back is so nice. You got that flicking tail that's pointing upwards. The contrast between the darkness in the tail and the back of the bird gives that sense that Rails like to flick up their tail. And it's so much more evident if I give a little bit of brightness to that brown, darken the greens a little bit and give the greens a little bit more saturation so that there's contrast between the back of the bird and the ground, the greenish reflections in the water. Okay, that improves the photo a lot, in my opinion. It really gives it that extra attention. Now, the final thing I want to do is, actually, before I get to that, I also want to discuss these areas in the water here. They look like splotches. They're not results of strange editing. They're just results of the photo of some strange pattern in the water. It's theoretically true that I can get rid of those a little bit. For example, I retouched, I cloned out a little bit of that splotch in the corner here. On, off, on, off. But I don't think I'm going to clone that out. I'm not really, like I said, I'm not really a big fan of too much cloning to make a photo look like it was a little bit different than in the scene. If there's a small splotch or something strange at the edge of the frame, yeah, that's one thing. But these splotches, these kind of unusual splotches, I feel like they kind of add a little bit of character to the photo. It's almost like a watercolor, right? So I'm going to keep those in. I'm not going to retouch them out. Now, the final thing I want to say is that, like I said earlier, this photo was taken at a high ISO. There wasn't much light, ISO 5000. You can see if I zoom in 1:1, it's a bit grainy. Theoretically, you could remove all that noise using some modern techniques that some people use. I'll be honest, I don't use AI noise reduction. I did use some denoising, and you can see a little bit of denoising is okay. If I turn off the denoising, you can see there's a lot more grain and a lot more chroma noise, so I remove that. I think I might have also removed the chroma noise using this contrast equalizer, which removes even more of the splotchiness caused by chroma noise, but I won't get into that. The point is, what I'm trying to make is that there's a little bit of grain. I'm actually going to add a little bit more grain in. And the reason why is because if I add a little bit more grain in, you probably can't see it too much, but I'll zoom in so you can see it a little bit more. So this is on, off, on, off. And by adding a bit more grain, it makes the whole graininess of the photo just a little bit more, I'll expand it. It makes the photo just a little bit more uniform. The graininess looks more deliberate. And it actually adds to that sort of mystique, that kind of early morning mystique of the bird in this pond. It's a little bit not completely clear what's going on. The grain or the leftover noise kind of adds to that. And so that's why I'm adding a little bit more grain here. If the photo's a little bit grainy and the grain actually adds to the photo, or at least the noise adds to the photo in some way, gives it a bit of an atmosphere, I like to add a little bit more grain in to make that grain just looking a little bit more uniform, a little bit more deliberate, and add a little bit to the effect. Now I'm going to export this photo, show you the before and after. The changes I showed to you today aren't extreme. I just removed a distraction in the bottom left-hand corner. I brightened the back of the rail a little bit to enhance that cool effect of the bird in the water, give you a nice sense. And I also added a little grain so that the grain in the photo looks a little bit more deliberate. So you see, those are the small things that you should be thinking about in your bird photography after you do the basic edits, after you do exposure, after you get the contrast and tones the way you like it. You should be thinking about those little things that might be distractions or that might not seem completely done, so that gives your photo a more deliberate feel. So I hope everyone enjoyed this episode of The Art of Bird Photography. I'll be back again soon with more tips and more ideas on composition and just the ideas that I like to use in bird photography. Hopefully this is going to help everyone else. And if you have any suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments because I'm very happy to take suggestions or answer some questions as well. I'll be back next time, and good luck with your shooting and your bird photography.